From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
In the end, it wasn't even close.
26 in the affirmative, 12 in the negative, and the act passes.
On Wednesday, the state Senate approved legislation legalizing same-sex marriage. The bill now heads back to the House, where most observers feel it will breeze through committee and floor votes next week. If passed, Governor Lincoln Chafee, a strong supporter of same-sex marriage, will likely sign it into law, allowing gay and lesbian couples to marry in Rhode Island beginning August 1st. But will there be a last-minute pushback by opponents? Our guests on the first half of Newsmakers, sponsors of the same-sex marriage bill, State Senator Donna Nesselbush and State Representative Arthur Handy. Joining us on the second half, same-sex marriage opponent and writer for Anchor Rising and the Ocean State Current, Justin Katz.
Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi and political reporter for Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning.
State senators and representatives, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Representative Handy, let's start with you. As I said in the beginning, the assumption is this will be a layup in the House. The bill was changed a little bit on the Senate side, so that has to be addressed again in the red chamber. What do you think is going to happen? How will that change affect the voting?
I've never heard it's called the red chamber. This was,
Me neither.
And when I think red, green, yes, no, kind of stuff. But
your opponents think communist, but
yeah, it's not where I go usually. But no, I know people feel it'll be an easy path, and I'm confident we're going to move it forward and pass it. But it's still not just procedural. We still do need to have a committee vote on it. We're going to have it on both those bills, and then move to the floor and still have. Likely again still have some floor debate, I believe, as well. I don't think it'll be as long as it was the first time.
Senator Nesselbush, let's talk about what the changes were in the amendments were in the Senate bill. The religious exemptions, what do they do? And for example, can the Knights of Columbus refuse to marry a same-sex couple?
Well, the Knights of Columbus, you mean can you refuse to have the wedding ceremony there? Obviously, right. It's sort of between religion itself and the clergy of religion that were protected in the original bill. And then the amendments that were made in the Senate expand those religious protections to religious organizations. And religious organizations are described in the bill as those that are controlled by a religious organization. And then, yes, those groups, do not have to extend their services to gay marriages and the celebrations of gay marriages.
But one of the amendments that didn't make it was the one on small businesses. And this is an issue that is popping up in New Mexico. I was reading on Ocean State Current. We have a guest on the second half from them, where a wedding photographer is being sued there because they refused to take pictures at a same-sex commitment ceremony. That has been taken out. How's that going to be handled here? What if a business doesn't want to serve representative, a same-sex wedding?
That's already against the law today, before this becomes law. Mm-hmm. We have the gay rights law along the way. It doesn't allow you to discriminate based on sexual orientation. So to me, it isn't an issue. Yeah, and we've never had a problem with that. We've never, ever had a problem with that. That law has been in the books for almost 15 years, or 10 years.
Well, we had the business that refused to deliver flowers, as we remember, to the young woman in Cranston. Yeah. So it's not.
And nothing ever came of that. I mean, I don't believe there was ever a legal challenge to that.
The right answer was people either decided they liked that business or they didn't like that business based on that publicity more than anything else. And that's a lot more of what I think would happen along the way. I mean,
Senator Nesselbush, the vote Wednesday in the state Senate in favor of same-sex marriage was hailed by supporters as a triumph of representative democracy. But didn't this process move forward in the Senate because the leadership, including Senate President Teresa Paiva-Weed, made a political calculation that it could be damaging to her leadership and other opponents of same-sex marriage, that they might face primaries next year if the vote didn't happen or if it was defeated?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say exactly, what Senate leadership was thinking, but I want to say thank you to the Senate leadership. I mean, clearly we all know that this bill got where it got because the Senate leadership, as I said in my remarks on the floor, put their personal and political convictions aside to let the will of the people and the collective wisdom of the people and their elected officials to cast a vote. I mean, people, before we really knew that we were going to win, everybody said, just give us the vote, call the roll, and at least then the voters will know if their senator voted against it. They can use that in their calculation in 2 years on what to do about that. So initially we were like, give us the vote. And I think momentum built very quickly and nicely this year. Rhode Islanders United for Marriage did a fantastic job. From the day the House passed the bill, at every point where momentum could have gone against us, momentum went with us. And Teresa Paiva-Weed is a very astute politician and leader, and she and her leadership team, made the decision that there would be a vote and the democratic process would be followed. And I will be forever grateful for leadership for that decision. One member of her leadership team, Majority Leader Dominic Ruggiero, came into the Judiciary Committee on Tuesday to vote in favor of putting same-sex marriage to a referendum. The thinking is that he wouldn't have done that if he thought that vote was going to lose, but he was on the losing side of that vote. How do you explain how that happened? Well, I think, obviously the rule is that they are ex officio members. They can come in. And Dominic has, I think, strongly held religious beliefs about that issue, and he decided to come in. But how did his side lose that vote? I mean, do you really think? I think they just didn't have the votes. I think Dominic felt what he felt, and Senator Ruggiero, Leader Ruggiero, wanted to come in and express his opinion on that by casting his vote. But I'm sure that leadership knew before that that they just didn't have the votes. I mean, it really came down to... The leader actually told me he was surprised by the outcome of that vote. I was surprised by the outcome. I went into that Senate Judiciary Committee hearing thinking that both bills were going to come out. So I, too, was surprised. Representative Handy, at what point, we've all, for a long time, a lot of, Ian and I have written it, Tim's written it, that same-sex marriage seemed like it would never get through the Senate so long as the current leadership was in place. And obviously, as Senator Nesselbush just said, that changed this year. At what point did you think to yourself, wow, I think this is going to get through, this is likely to become law this year? Sure. Well, I mean, I think I definitely after the elections, I sort of felt like I sort of evaluated things there. The fact that we in the House moved the bill out early, I think, gave the thousands, gave the advocates the opportunities, I should say, to knock on thousands of doors, make thousands of phone calls, get thousands of letters out. But also, I really did see momentum switching, as Senator Nesselbush was saying, and I do want to also thank the leadership on that side. I do think that what they did was let people vote their conscience. They still voted theirs as well, voted against the bill. I think that's certainly, obviously that's what we all say we want most of the time, is for people to get that chance to vote their conscience. But in the end, the president came out for it. I mean, we've seen a lot of things sort of adding to that momentum that have all, I think, contributed to make it easier. Ed Pacheco, as the former, now, well, as of May 3rd, I guess, former chair of the Democratic Party, he pushed to have them be in front of it. And so I think while 2011, when we didn't do it, was a disappointment to me, I think, I started to, I would say I was very optimistic, but cautiously so, all the way up until they'd announced that they were going to have that vote come out. But I felt like I'd started to hear more and more switches. Senator Rep, Senator Nesselbush, and others. What was your, I mean, you've been arguing for this, and your allies have for such a long time. What was your feeling when you finally, the roll was called and it passed? I literally just got goosebumps as I did at that moment. I could barely find words for it. It was elation. I really remember probably my second thought after realizing I was gay. My first thought was, oh my God, how will I ever tell my family? And I think my second thought was, wow, I'll never get married. So to see such a change in my own lifetime, so it's probably been 30 years that I have been out. I mean, I discovered that in college. To watch that shift in 30 years and to just see year after year how it's held for further study. There was a time when I really thought that I would never see it. So the change in public opinion happening so quickly over the last 6 months, really, in the state of Rhode Island, things really, when I look at that, Representative Handy, I see President Obama and then President Clinton when he remarked about the movie and the Golden Globes and called that a cauldron of compromise and principle. I think so many people made the relate, even the movie Lincoln coming out. I spent a lot of time speaking to my Senate colleagues about that movie and how do we look back on that now, and how will people look back on your vote. And then we had the Senator Chacon's bill, and some of the senators
that was the bill for a referendum.
Correct, and some of the senators coming off on that, which I think actually also created a lot of discussion. So momentum built very steadily along the way.
Let me ask you a personal question. You said, when you first learned and you came out that you thought, my goodness, I'm never going to get married. Well, it looks like it's going to pass. If it does pass, if Governor Chafee signs it into law, do you anticipate getting married after August 1st?
I absolutely do, Tim. My partner and I have talked about that, though I have joked with Ian on the Senate floor that I think in the end, passing marriage equality may turn out to be easier than planning a wedding with my partner. I want a big wedding. I want to invite everybody who was involved in the process. And Kelly said, I think we should have a small, intimate wedding. So we're involved in those details now. But yes, I do plan to marry
Let's
Kelly.
get a voice of opposition in. I want to play for both of you something from the floor debate earlier this week. Many same-sex marriage advocates have made this a civil rights issue and talked about that, but during the vote on Wednesday, State Senator Harold Metz took offense to that. Let's take a listen to him.
On the issue of civil rights, we know that it was a strategy of the gay activists to hitch their wagon to the civil rights movement. But let me say this, I can change my sexual preference tonight if I want to, but I can't change my color. What people do in the privacy of their bedrooms can never compare to the horrors of what African Americans went through on the Middle Passage on their way to slavery to these shores. So many of my community take exception to this comparison.
State Senator Harold Metz during the floor vote on Wednesday. He gave a very impassioned speech in opposition. He went on to say, quote, supporters of same-sex marriage have been intolerant of religious views. He took exception to the civil rights comparison. Respond to that if you could.
Well, I absolutely think it is a civil right. I think, and also I think, even if you look at, the idea of the right to, the pursuit of happiness and those kinds of things within the Declaration of Independence also underscored as well. But the notion that we're ignoring religious liberties is absurd to me, because in the end, I think a lot of the testimony we heard from faith leaders, from dozens of faith leaders, both at hearings and at rallies and things like that, were that we want to perform these ceremonies. Our congregations want to have these ceremonies. Members of our congregation want to get married, and you're telling us we can't. That right there, to me, is a barrier to somebody being able to practice their faith the way they want to. Nothing in this bill is going to compel anyone of the Catholic faith or any other type of faith, some of the more conservative Jewish faiths, to not do that. In fact, if I recall correctly, there was a rabbi who actually came out saying, I am not in favor of gay marriage, but I think you should pass this bill because it does not affect my faith at all. I will still not perform gay marriages, but others that want to within their faith can. It doesn't make any sense to me. So and there's the religious civil right as a result there too, that I think also that people sometimes forget in this discussion, because we do often talk about more as the legal side of marriage or the state civil side of it. But in the end, there's some other aspects here where we're barring faiths from practicing their religion the way they want to.
Prior to the Senate vote on Wednesday, Senator Erin Lynch said she had gotten personal threats as part of this issue. Did either of you get threats in the run-up to this vote?
No, certainly, very harsh discussions occasionally, but when I went out door knocking on it, I think I had one person that said they were against gay marriage at a door. Everybody else that ever asked me about it, already knew where I was, were saying they were in favor. So.
How about you, Senator
No
Nesselbush?
threats. Thankfully, no threats.
Okay.
Lots of debate, lots of discussion on the issue, but nothing that ever made me.
Well, no. One interesting thing inside the bill is that it actually it eliminates civil unions, which I don't know if that might be standard practice when same-sex marriage becomes legal in places. What was the thinking there that the civil union statute created just 2 years ago, which of course was not really favored by advocates, to end that altogether when marriage comes in?
Just simply that it really wasn't favored. Very few people took advantage of it in the 2 years that we had it. And in terms of a body of law and how to establish marriages and then dissolve marriages, there's much more of a body of law on marriage, and so it was just thought cleaner going forward to eliminate that as of August 1st as well. And some of the advocacy groups, not only Rhode Islanders United for Marriage, but also GLAAD, which of course is a bastion of legal thinking on sort of the advancement of gay rights, they were in favor of that as well, and so it seemed to be the right thing to do.
All right.
And there's a sort of reciprocity too. You know, civil unions aren't clearly aren't clearly necessarily recognized in other states. Marriage is traditionally recognized in other states.
State Senator Donna Nesselbush, State Representative Arthur Handy, thank you very much for joining us on the program. And when we come back, this conversation continues. We're going to bring in Justin Katz, same-sex marriage opponent and writer for Anchor Rising and Ocean State Current. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, Ted Nesi from WPRI.com and political reporter for Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis. Our guest for the second half and the conversation this week is same-sex marriage is Justin Katz. He's a same-sex marriage opponent and he's a writer for Anchor Rising and Ocean State Current. You can read him on oceanstatecurrent.com. Justin, the school of thought is that this is a done deal. This is going to breeze through the House. Our opponents conceding defeat this year.
Well, I heard Dan York on the radio yesterday saying that there hadn't been a whole lot of people really out there as an organized opposition. One of the things that I caught was early in the House bill, there was some opposition to some of the religious protections that were inserted in the Senate. That might have been a negotiating stance to give those as a give and take. That might disrupt it later down the road, but probably not. It seems to be that this is done.
So what about in the coming years? The only way to turn back on this is to have some legislative action. Do you think there's going to be a push to repeal the same-sex marriage law?
There may. I have no information on that. To me, the more important thing
should
now,
there be?
Well, should there be? I think there should be, but I think the real focus right now is to figure out how you start to do the cultural things that marriage is supposed to do in light of the changed definition that the legislature appears to be prepared to
What do you mean by that?
Well, marriage as a cultural institution is a way we set expectations for people. If you're doing this, you should be married, and it's a very simple, basic explanation. It's interesting if you look at the demographics of this. If in Providence, there are some neighborhoods where 1 in 4 minority children don't actually live with both their parents, so 3 and 4 do not, or more. Then you go to Barrington and East Greenwich, and you find, I had a debate with the Providence Journal editor whether it's fair to say most or almost all, but of all races live with both of their parents, according to census data. So that's what marriage is supposed to be. It's if you are doing things that create children, then you should be married. And it's not to give a union to people who are going to behave responsibly anyway. It's to create this expectation so that people who need that extra structure have somewhere to go. That's taken off the table. How do you bring that back? If you can't say, well, marriage is for men and women who have this sort of relationship, how do you target that cultural need to have parents stay with their children that they create?
By that argument, wouldn't you have more parents out there?
Pardon me?
By that argument, wouldn't you have more parents out there if you're marrying more people? You'd have 2 moms or 2 dads and children in that household. So,
well, as I'm saying, the idea of marriage isn't for the people who are going to behave responsibly sort of anyway, like they are in Barrington and East Greenwich. We see there's been lots of, there have been books about recently how the upper classes are maintaining a sort of cultural family structure, culturally traditional family structure, while middle class and lower class families are drifting away from that. And it's creating a big divergence in economic well-being and other kinds of well-being. The institution of marriage is for those people who need that extra structure. It's sort of like people who, for example, one of the things said in the last segment was that churches couldn't marry people. No, they could. They could have a religious ceremony, say you are married according to the customs of our church. People who are going to seek that kind of marriage and be married their entire lives responsibly, I see them as sort of investing in the culture of marriage, and that's taken out the other end by people who need that structure. The problem now is, and you see this in polling data, younger generations are saying, you know what, kids' marriage, they're not really equivalent. They're not related. That's sort of the argument. Creating children does not.
Let me ask you, Justin. I was reading actually Ross Douthat the other day from the New York Times, who is a very eloquent writer about the social conservative case about this. One thing that comes through in Douthat's writing is it's not. It seems like to him, and I'd like to get your reaction to this, about so much about gays and lesbians and the same-sex aspect of this. It's actually a broader issue seen with sort of the change in sexual ethics since especially the 1950s and 1960s. And same-sex marriage is a piece of that, but there are many other things. There are things in straight relationships that are also a part of this critique. Can you sort of speak to that and how that all fits together?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's always been part of the argument. I jumped into this debate 2000, 2001, around then, and people like, for example, Maggie Gallagher, who runs the National Organization for Marriage, or is a high executive in that organization, she was on divorce. She didn't move to same-sex marriage until 2002, 3.
What do you mean by on divorce?
Well, that was sort of her focus on saving marriage was divorce. But what a lot of people recognized was once you make this leap into same-sex marriage, where you say man and woman is no different than woman, woman, man, man, once you make that leap, it becomes harder, as I was saying earlier, to make the argument to strengthen divorce laws or what have you, because the main purpose, the main point, the strongest argument is the children that can naturally be created by what men and women do together.
Can you point to evidence in other states that have legalized same-sex marriage of any adverse fallout that would buttress your argument that same-sex marriage is harmful to the interests of society?
Well, the culture of the United States, and this is actually a silver lining, this move in Rhode Island, luckily, and no moves in Rhode Island have national and cultural implications to much of a degree. The culture of the United States is a bit broader than any single state. And it's very hard to tease things apart. So you compare, say, Massachusetts to Mississippi. The demographics there are so hugely different. You can't say, oh, well, look, the evangelicals are divorcing a lot and Massachusetts isn't. Well, you know, you're talking a big difference in the kind of people who live in those states. Also, people in Massachusetts are getting married less than in Mississippi. But so this is a generational thing. It's going to take years for this sort of cultural shift to really manifest itself. I mean, you can look in Europe, in some of the northern European countries that have had same-sex marriage for a while, and start to see couples drifting away from the principle of getting married when they have children. And about 2002, 2003, Stanley Kurtz was writing a lot about the demographics of that and saying what was happening was people were, culturally, they had already sort of reached the point where on your first child you didn't get married, when you had the second you did. And when same-sex marriage came in, there was an inflection point in the data, and it started to be the second child.
So yeah, I mean, I've read a lot. I think it's France where there's just a lot of couples just never get married. They just stay together. They even have children. So are you attributing that to same-sex marriage, to that institution as having that sort of an effect on it?
Well, no. As I said earlier, that's been happening cultural anyway. I think a lot of the arguments for and the support for same-sex marriage are sort of projections from people who aren't gay themselves. A lot of that was happening. What same-sex marriage does is it says this is final. From now on, we cannot go back from this point. We cannot reinvigorate the idea that people who can create children should be married because they can create children.
So are you saying it cheapens the institution of marriage?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, for somebody like Senator Nesselbush, obviously, it doesn't. She had the same reactions that anybody who's starting to think about getting married has. So I don't look at it as a value judgment in that way. It's a purposeful institution that is critical, I think, to the foundations that allow us to be free and to have strong, limited government. That's one of the things I've thought about with this, too. For progressives, this idea doesn't matter, that, well, now we can't invest this institution with families to take care of their own children, because they'll come in with more laws to force people to give child support. They'll come in with more birth control, more abortions, more social programs for child care, and that's on their side that's under their philosophy. That's what same-sex marriage is, sort of a marker that makes it harder to go back from that and say, no, we need a culture that supports people and has people do what they can within their own lives to support their own children whom they did something to create.
One of the somewhat surprising parts of the politics of this, Justin, is the entire Republican Senate caucus in Rhode Island voted for legalizing same-sex marriage, as did the Republican leader in the House, Brian Newbury. What was your reaction to that? What are you hearing from your fellow social conservatives in Rhode Island about the Republican Party? I think more than half of the Republicans in the General Assembly supported same-sex marriage.
Well, first of all, we're not like a cadre where I get a bunch of calls, what are we going to do now? But I think that's a marker of the very peculiar politics of same-sex marriage. I mean, if you look at the last week and the two sides, you had 5 white guys, 2 lawyers, a doctor, an insurance executive, and a college kid were being celebrated as the civil rights advocates. And who were the faces of oppression and retrograde social views? A black urban senator and a group of Hispanics singing hymns in the rotunda. That's very peculiar. And to me, that marked politically, just as a political calculation, that marks a huge, huge misstep for the Republicans. I mean, vote your conscience, absolutely. They did more than that. They said, yeah, we're national leaders. Right. And they sort of implicitly maligned people like me who think freedom in small government requires a social conservatism. Where they said, oh, you can't pick and choose where you have small government.
Justin, we're out of time. So just 10 seconds real quick. Any conservatives you like for governor right now? Silence is deafening.
I'm keeping an eye.
Keeping an eye. Justin Katz, he writes for OceanStateCurrent.com. You can read him there. For Ted Nesi, Ian Donis, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.
We gotta get you a better filibuster.